Hi everyone. Today I take up rule 6 of the rules of the road, which deal with the safe speed concept. And now this rule, again, I can talk hours about it because there is so much to understand here. But what I'll do is I'll try to keep this video short, but yet at the same time try to go deep into the rule. So again, I'll focus on the key phrases and words, and you should do the same. And you should remember these key phrases and words and understand the meaning of each to get a whole understanding of this rule so that you remember it not only for your O-levels examination, but also when you go to C and you have to apply this rule practically. Rule 6 deals with safe speed. It requires you to make your own judgment on the appropriate speed for your vessel, taking into account the situation you are in and the situation you are moving towards. That is because excessive speed contributes to many collisions. The first phrase that you have to focus here on is every vessel. This means this is applicable to every vessel. There are no exceptions here. All right, so this is part A of the rule. So of course this is the beginning of the rule. Now I'm not going to read out the rule, you can read it out yourself. So I'm going to take the essential paragraphs, each paragraph, and then focus on the keywords here. So the first phrase that you have to focus on is that this rule applies to every vessel and there are no exceptions. It is also applicable at all times. So every vessel shall at all times. Again, there is no exception. Whenever the vessel is moving, this rule is applicable to the vessel. Now, if you remember, these phrases were also used in Rule 5, lookout, the rule we discussed previously. Therefore, Rule 5 on lookout and Rule 6 are closely linked. If you do not obey Rule 5, then you cannot obey Rule 6. I'll also show you some other key phrases and words that are common between Rule 5 and Rule 6. The next word is safe speed. Now, if you think about it, this rule in no place will describe the term safe speed. It will not describe the phrase safe speed. It will not allot a specific number to it. Because safe speed cannot be defined, it is different for every vessel. You cannot allot a number to it even if you know the maneuvering speeds of the vessel. You cannot. Because safe speed, like I told you before, is the interpretation of your own judgment. It could be your judgment or it could be the master's judgment. Now, of course, practically on the ship, it is the master who makes the judgment call on what speed should the vessel be proceeding at in different circumstances. But let's say for the practices of learning this, this is the call of the officer on watch. So safe speed will never be defined by a number. So no matter what the oral examiner tells you, no matter what, how much they tempt you into allotting a number, do not fall for that trap. All right. So there have been instances in the past when the surveyor has actually pressurized or kind of tempted or tricked the student into quoting a number by giving examples of the maximum speed or the maneuvering speeds, and the candidate falls into that trap. Do not fall into that trap. So even if the examiner says that it's restricted visibility, your visibility is absolutely zero, you can't see anything, what speed would you be doing? And you keep saying safe speed, and they'll say, but what is safe speed? Safe speed, give us a number. Don't fall for that trap. You cannot give a number. All right, so that is your call. Do not allot a number to it, and you will say that the safe speed is how, and we will describe it later on as well. We'll talk about that as we go along. All right. So the safe speed is the speed in which the vessel can take proper and effective action. Now again, if you note here, the word proper, effective, they are vague terms. They are not specific terms. Right? You cannot define proper. If I ask you to define what is proper, you cannot define proper. You can only say, oh, it's the correct action. Effective action, what does that mean? Effective action. So these are terms which are very vague. But what it means to tell is that you should take action which is effective to, the next phrase is, avoid the collision. So your effective action may be different from my effective action, but as long as it avoids the collision and and the vessel can be stopped, then that is an effective action. That is a proper action. Alright, so these terms may be vague, but this is what you have to tell the surveyor. So tomorrow when the oral examiner is tempting you to quoting a speed, a number, 6 knots, 5 knots, 4 knots, they will tempt you. You say, no, I will not give it a number because it cannot be defined by a number. The safe speed is that speed in which I can take proper and effective action to avoid the collision and stop the vessel also within a distance that is appropriate. Again, the word appropriate is a vague term. Your appropriate could be different from my appropriate. So you cannot say that appropriate, proper, effective can be defined. Alright, so word appropriate here depends on the prevailing circumstance and condition. Now I know when you are listening to this video or you are looking at this video and you say that, Sam, you are pretty much highlighting all the words in the paragraph. Why are you saying these are the key words and phrases? And you are right. But all these phrases and words are important. What can I do? I cannot avoid it. So when you are learning this rule, you may think that all the phrases and words are important, but actually if you think about it, if you remember these words and the meaning of it, you don't have to remember any of this. You don't have to memorize it. If you understand what proper and effective action means, you don't have to define safe speed. So if you understand what is prevailing circumstance and condition, that means the condition which you are in, circumstances and conditions which are around you. So when you are explaining the safe speed, do not allot a number. All you have to tell the surveyor is that yes, the safe speed, I will not give it a number. The safe speed is a speed in which I can take proper and effective action. Because remember, if you are going too slow, sometimes the rudder will be ineffective, just like it happens during maneuvering. If you stop the vessel or if you're going slow, the rudder is ineffective. The helmsman cannot keep the course steady. So that is not safe speed. If you are going at too high a speed, it may be too late for you to take action, especially when the visibility is restricted or you cannot see a small craft. So that is why you cannot give it a number. You can never give it a number no matter what is the temperature. You should be able to avoid collision with other vessels, and also you should be able to stop the vessel within a distance that is appropriate to the prevailing circumstance and conditions. So if it's open sea, you want to stop the vessel, you can stop it, no problem. It can go for a longer distance. But if it's in narrow channels or if it is between two landmarks, then you cannot have the luxury of stopping the distance, having a stopping distance which will take your vessel further than what is required to. If you have shallow patches of water around you, you cannot just stop a vessel with the luxury that it can go another few miles. Maybe it will run into the shallow patch, it will run into the recon or buoys or landmarks. But open sea, you have the luxury, so you can go at a higher speed. All right, I'll keep going. Now, without exception, a safe speed is a reduced speed. Because in most cases, if either the ship reduces speed, their closest point of approach or CPA starts to increase. The risk of collision then of course reduces. It gives you more time to think and to act. Time to think and to act is all important. Too much speed and too little time can lead to a fatal collision. It impairs, it impacts your risk assessment process. You don't have much time to process or analyze the scenario because you are going at such a fast speed. Now, though I don't know what kind of vessels you are sailing on. Some vessels go at 25, 30 knots. So they are proceeding at a very high speed. So there is hardly any time for you to analyze the scenario. There could be some vessels which are going at 5 knots, 6 knots. That's fine. You get more time. So that is all it depends on. All right. Again, this is the second paragraph of the rule. So the rule keeps on attempting to define safe speed, yet at the same time it is a bit vague. So what it says is, in determining a safe speed, the following factors shall be among those taken into account. A, by all vessels. So here you have to focus only on the word by all vessels. What should all vessels do? Because the second part of this rule focuses on vessels only with operational radar. So part A is for all vessels, irrespective of what type of vessel you are on. When you are analyzing the safe speed, when you're deciding on the safe speed, and this is what the master also does, tomorrow you're going to be masters as well, you have to determine the safe speed by first the visibility. This is common sense. I'm sure this will come to you naturally. You don't have to memorize this word. of course the visibility becomes the most important criteria. Normally if the visibility is good, even though there may be bloody thousands of ships, we keep going at full speed because of ETA. We have to, ETA is estimated time of arrival, we have to make it to the next port in good time, we have the company pressure on us, we cannot justify so speed if the vessel visibility is good. So of course the visibility is the first criteria. We can only justify reduction of speed in poor visibility, otherwise the company will of course frown upon us. The second word is of course traffic density. Again, this is common sense. So when you are memorizing this rule, don't memorize this rule, memorize these keywords and phrases. If you can define what is safe speed, you don't have to memorize the first paragraph. If you can define, or if you can remember these key factors, just visibility, the word visibility, the word traffic density, because if you have been sailing on ships, you know, common sense, these are the factors that of course impact. Now when we say traffic density, the rule clears it that it includes concentration of fishing vessels as well as any other vessels. So don't think that traffic density only refers to big vessels. They don't want you to have that kind of a vague idea about traffic density. Traffic density means all vessels, any vessels, whether it's fishing vessels, naval crafts, commercial vessels, anything that is included in traffic density, all kinds of vessels. All right, so make sure that you remember this word. The third thing is the maneuverability of the vessel. Now I know the maneuverability of the vessel is very important, but what happens is when we are at lower ranks like third officer, second officer, even up to chief officer, we kind of underestimate it. We don't study this, we don't understand the importance of this, because maneuverability of the vessel becomes the master's responsibility. Moreover, because we are normally, when we are on the bridge, we are going at full speed, it is only master who comes up and then decides on the speed, or you ask the master and you inform the master about the visibility. But maneuverability of the vessel is very important and it should not be underestimated by any officer. Firstly, because you are training to become a master, you should anyway understand it. And secondly, because if you are proceeding at a safe speed, which is slower than your full normal speed, full engine sea speed, you have to understand how the vessel will behave under helm. All right, so because sometimes, if I take an example, there is rough weather, and we'll talk about the weather factor as well in the next slide. Then of course the vessel goes at very slow speed, because in rough weather, when the ship is pitching and pounding and slamming, the engine speeds are reduced, the engine revolutions are reduced to reduce the impact on the main engine. So at that point of time also, you see that you have to give excessive helm, but at the same time you have to allow the vessel to yaw. So these are very important considerations. So you have to understand how the vessels maneuver under different conditions, under different speeds, so that you can understand when it can be stopped, how much distance will it go, what is the turning ability of the vessel, if you have to take an alteration or make an alteration rather, to avoid collision. So these are all important. So remember, you are responsible for proceeding at a safe speed. If an alteration of speed is necessary, then you do not have to ask permission. But of course, if the alteration of the speed is necessary, you definitely, in practical terms, have to inform the master. Although you don't have to take permission, but you know how it all works. You can inform the engine room, but you also have to inform the master. But at the same time, when the speed starts to reduce, you have to be very mindful of the ability of the vessel to maneuver under different circumstances. Again, the part A of this rule, by all vessels, continues. It gives you three more factors that you have to consider in determining the safe speed. The fourth one is the presence of background lights. Now, many people don't understand what is background lights. So background lights could be, like the rule says, it could be from the shore lights, or it could be the backscatter of your own navigation light. So sometimes you will see in conditions of fog or rain, when the rain is being met head on, you can see that your front masthead light kind of provides some kind of background light. You know, you can see the angle at which the rain falls or there is fog. The forward masthead light on a commercial vessel I'm talking about, it kind of creates that background light effect. Because of that, you can sometimes get distracted. Sometimes you may think it is the light of another vessel, you know, it in that respect. Also shore lights, when you're approaching ports, or you may be passing a port, or you may be passing a land where there is excessive shore lights, and that creates a background light effect as well, which hampers your visibility, which creates that kind of a effect where you cannot see especially smaller crafts, or you cannot see certain lights at night. So that is why, if that is a scenario where there is too much backscatter, when there is too much light around you, then you have to consider that your visibility is restricted. Now there may not be any fog, there may not be any rain showers or snowstorms or hailstorms or sandstorms. But even with the effective or too much backscatter of lights, you have to consider that to be a factor that impairs your visibility, and or you have to reduce the speed of the vessel. Then again, of course, the state of wind, sea and current, like I've told you before, and also navigational hazards. So don't forget, there's also the proximity of navigational hazards. So part 5 is not only talking about the weather conditions, it also talks about the proximity of navigational hazards. And navigational hazards, there are many. There could be wrecks, they could be nearby land, there could be shallow patches, there could be military exercises, there could be anything. There are so many navigational hazards, so you have to consider those navigational hazards, and you have to consider the state of wind, sea and current. So I've given you an example already, that if maybe the sea is so rough, the vessel is slamming, pitching, pounding against the seas, the engine room will experience loads on the main engine, they will reduce the RPM, and at that point of time your speed is reduced, the maneuverability of the vessel is affected, but you have to proceed at the safe speed. Finally, by all vessels, they also have to consider the draft in relation to the depth of the water, because this pretty much determines whether you are in shallow water or not. So if you are in shallow water, then naturally sometimes you have to reduce the speed. More or less, because shallow water you will experience mainly in pilotage waters, or maybe river passages or narrow channels mostly, right? Open sea is not associated with shallow patches. Now what happens with shallow waters is the draft in relation to the depth of the water determines whether you are in shallow water or not. In shallow water, if you keep going at safe speed, what is caused? Squat is caused, right? Because of the venturi effect, the vessel is sucked in, because in shallow water, if you are going at full sea speed, the water will pass underneath the keel at a very high speed, and that creates a suction effect which sucks the vessel towards the bottom. And if you are already in shallow waters, the bottom of the vessel may touch the seabed, which will of course damage the vessel, especially if it is a rocky bottom, or if it is that can create damage. So when you are in shallow water, which is determined by the ratio of the depth of the vessel to the draft of the vessel, depth of water to the draft of the vessel, then also you have to reduce your vessel speed to safe speed. So these are 6 factors that have been determined by all vessels. All vessels have to use these 6 factors. All right. Now let's move on to vessels with operational radar. So these next factors will be, or next 6 factors are only for vessels with operational radar. So if your vessel doesn't have operational radar, then you cannot consider these 6 factors as factors for you to consider the reduction of speed, or rather to proceed as safe speed. I should not be calling reduction at speed, I should be saying the word safe speed. All right. Now remember, radars and RPAs, they are not infallible. They can damage, they can stop working. All right. They may also miss some targets altogether, or they might come up as large targets, as weak echoes. So large targets sometimes may come as weak echoes. You may have a massive aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean, but because of some reason you may be getting it as a weak echo. And night, in poor visibility, if you get it at weak echo, you will underestimate it and you will pass closer than what you should be passing it at, and that could lead to trouble. Also, your radar settings, you may, and user error is there, because you as a user may not have set the settings correctly, so that will affect the vessel as well. All right. So navigational aids such as ECDIS and GPS can also be equally suspect. They may not work properly, or they may have errors in them. So you cannot rely on any one instrument or any one technique. You always must double check to make sure that the visibility or the lookout is being maintained as per the visibility, or you are proceeding at the correct speed. So constantly monitoring your speed, the situation at sea is always changing, and a safe speed in one situation can be too fast in another. So situations can change suddenly, and so therefore your safe speed determination will also change. All right. So you may have to increase it, you may have to reduce it, depends. So that's why I should not say safe speed is reduction of speed. Sometimes safe speed can be increase of speed as well, as conditions improve or conditions become more suitable. So let's get into this part B of this rule, which says vessels with operational radar. So vessels with operational radar, when they are determining the factors to consider safe speed, you have to consider the characteristics, the efficiency, and the limitations of the radar. And that will come only with practice. That will only come when you start using the radar. So you have to remember whether it's an X-band radar or a S-band radar. One is used for long range detection, one is used for short range detection. how efficient these radars are. All right, how quickly they can pick up echoes, how quickly they can detect echoes, and the limitations of the radar equipment. What are the limitations? They could be blind sectors, right? So they could be very old, so there could be a problem with the picture quality. So there are many limitations that you can think of. What else should you be thinking? Constraints imposed by the radar range scale in use. What are constraints? Constraints are also limitations, right? So especially when you are operating in restricted visibility, you should have one radar range scale in short range scanning, one you should have radar for long range scanning, but you have to remember the constraints that are imposed by it. So short range scaling, of course, they may pick up closer targets, they may pick up smaller targets, but they will give you late detection, right? It may be not sufficient time for you to take action. Long range scanning, of course, they provide you with early detection of vessels which are around you, but at the same time, they may miss some smaller targets. So these are the constraints imposed by the radar range scale in use. So when you change the radar, when you are putting the radar or the ARPA on different range scales, you have to be aware of the constraints. So you cannot determine the visibility. So why is this important in determining the safe speed? Because see, tomorrow you're trying to detect a vessel, you're trying to detect the visibility, you're trying to determine whether the visibility is restricted or not, and you're trying to pick up a target. So you have to be very careful about what factor you consider to determine the visibility and the resulting safe speed. Because when you're using radars and ARPAs, you're completely relying on it. Then you have to determine, you have to be aware of their limitations. So when you are trying to determine the visibility, don't only rely on one equipment. Try to use other equipments as well. Then we have the effect on radar detection of the sea state, weather, and other sources. So of course, probably if you have been sailing, you know that when the seas are rough, when the weather is rough, there are sea sprays, there is rain, that affects your radar detection, because when there are sea sprays, rain, then you have to use the rain clutter or the sea clutter, and the more clutter you start to use, it affects the amplification of the echo. Smaller targets may go missing, and if you are completely relying on the radar to determine the visibility, to decide on your safe speed, then that will affect your decision making. Then the possibility, and this continues with vessels with operational radar. So there is a possibility that certain small vessels, ice, other floating objects may not be detected. Of course, we have discussed this. This is also the case when there is sea sprays, rain, and you have put the clutter too high, or simply it could be everything could be perfect, but still there are certain small vessels, there are certain floating objects, debris, ice that do not have good reflectability surface. So how does radar pick up targets? Because the radar sends its waves, the waves hit the target and they are reflected back, which are then picked up by the radar scanner again and displayed as a picture on the radar screen. But certain objects, certain vessels may present a certain angle, or they may not have a good reflectability surface, because of which they may not be picked up by the radar, and that is also a constraint to determining the visibility if you are completely determining on the radar to determine the visibility and hence the resulting safe speed. Again, the number, location, and movement of vessels detected by radar. Now remember, when you are in circumstances or conditions where there are many vessels around you, right? You may be in a traffic separation scheme or a narrow channel, or you may be in a river passage. Now, of course, that becomes very complicated because the radar is trying to show you everything. So when you see, if you put the radar range scale too high, then you will see everything on your screen. It will become very cluttered. It will be very difficult for you to determine what's going on. Even when you have been only talking about visibility, but let's talk about risk of collision. If there are too many vessels on your screen, you may get distracted. So you may not be able to determine there is a certain vessel which has a higher risk of collision than the other vessel, right? There may be too much alarms coming in, too many vectors that you see on your radar screen. So then you lower the range scale. But the problem with lowering the range scale is, of course, you can see the important vessels, the number of vessels, the number of movement reduces, but also you get late detection like we've discussed before. And finally, the last factor is whether the more exact assessment of the visibility is possible when radar is used to determine the range of vessels or other objects in the vicinity. And I've covered this as well. You cannot you cannot depend completely on the only other radar or the ARPA or the ECDIS or the GPS or the AIS. You cannot depend solely on one object or one instrument. You have to use all available means, and that's why I said rule number 5 and rule number 6 is connected, and you have to remember this. How is the two rules connected with each other? because you have to again use all available means. It doesn't say so here in this rule, but you have to use all available means to determine the visibility, to determine the risk of collision, to determine the situation around you, because depending on the situation you will have to adjust your safe speed, or you have to advise the master to adjust the safe speed of the vessel. So before I end this video, I know I can keep going on and on. It's difficult for us to discuss a rule, keep it short and yet not make it too long, but I try to focus on the important phrases and keywords. I look forward to your feedback and hearing from you what you think about these videos. But the key word here, the key thing that I would take away from this video is that, remember, do not fall for the temptation of quoting a number. No matter what the surveyor tells you, do not quote a number to the safe speed. You cannot give it a number. Also, firstly, because safe speed depends on the vessels. Different vessels have different safe speeds. Number two, it depends on the master, on you as the officer on watch, what it is all about. It also depends, number three, it depends on the prevailing circumstances and conditions. Safe speed can be constantly changing, so you cannot allot a number to it. All right, so I'll stop this video here. It's almost 30 minutes long. Let me know what you thought about this video, and I look forward to your feedback, and thank you for supporting the channel. I appreciate your comments, your views, your feedback, your subscription, your membership. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye for now.